Some years ago, I was at a party talking with a man with whom I've been casual friends for years. He's a little older than I am, had a very successful career in the arts, a good man, smart man. It was late afternoon. The sun was beginning to set on a beautiful summer day. The party was outside on the lawn of a house high on a hillside with a view for miles. The smell of new-mown grass was in the air, and at one point as I was talking to this man, there came one of those moments to me where you just step back interiorly and just feel thankful to be alive right then. And out of that moment, I started talking about thankfulness, talking about it with this guy. I didn't mean to preach. I just said I thought the habit of thankfulness was a good one and a healthy one to cultivate. And my friend looked at me and he said, "What have I got to be thankful for?" He was not saying my life is terrible. To the contrary, I could see in his eyes that he was saying, I have a very good life, which I deserve. I've worked hard and well for what I have, and I've earned all of it. So why are you presuming to tell me that I should be thankful? There was a twinkle in his eye, but there was an edge in his voice as well. Well, thankfulness, like faith, is not something you can argue anybody into. Nonetheless, I answered, probably with a little edge of my own, be thankful for the air in your lungs. Be thankful for that wonderful woman over there who is your wife. Be thankful for this beautiful sunset that we're seeing. Be thankful for the people you have worked with in your life who have welcomed you into their own lives and helped you grow as a human being. Once you start thinking about things to be thankful for, it's not hard to keep going. In the Christian life, thankfulness is not the same thing as gratitude. It's not giving credit where credit is due. And it certainly is not just being polite. Thankfulness is a way of life. It's like hope. It's a stance we take in relation to the world and our entry into it every minute of every day. The medieval Christian mystic Meister Eckhart said that if the only prayer you said in your life was thank you, that would be sufficient. Well, sufficient to what? What does he mean? Sufficient to put us in right relationship to God. Thankfulness is a constant, joyful dwelling in the knowledge that God creates each of us uniquely and loves each of us infinitely. But we have to be on the lookout, because sometimes God's gifts are subtle. Sometimes they come incognito. Both lectionary readings we just heard have to do with just such gifts of God, which don't appear to be gifts at first at all. Today's Old Testament reading is the story of the bread from heaven, which the Israelites came to call manna. It's one of the most famous gifts of God in the Bible. In the story from Exodus, Moses has led the Israelites out of Egypt, out of slavery. They are on a journey to find a new home. They're out in the wilderness, and they have nothing to eat, and they complain to Moses that they might just as well have died in slavery back in Egypt as starve out here. So Moses intercedes with God. God sends them quails for meat in the evening. And the next morning when the dew evaporates, there's the bread from heaven, which doesn't look to the Israelites like any kind of bread they're familiar with. The Bible describes it as we heard, a fine, flaky substance on the ground. A little later in this chapter, after the passage we heard today, the Bible tells us that the Israelites call it manna. This is because, as we heard in today's passage, the Israelites look at it and say, what is it? That's the Hebrew for what is it? Manu. That's why we call it manna. What is it? That's their reaction. This is a gift of God? I think this is a wonderful capsule dramatization of the general cluelessness of the human race with regard to the gifts of God. For those many, many times when we don't recognize them as such, we stand there and we look at whatever it is and say, what is it? Because we want God to give us what we want, what we think we need. on our terms. We're so insistent on this, we don't see what God is giving us. And above all, we don't see or care that it's God who is giving it. So we're not thankful. Our tendency is to ignore God's presence in our lives. And so to shut ourselves off from the true, infinite richness of life that God is constantly offering us. If we're disposed to be thankful, to live in thankfulness, this problem is easier to overcome. The parable of the laborers in the vineyard from the Gospel of Matthew is a kind of a case study in this. The owner of the vineyard hires workers at 5 different times over the course of a single day, and to the ones that he hires last in the late afternoon, he says, "Why are you standing around idle all day?" He's doing his due diligence. And they say, "Because no one has hired us." So they're not lazy. They just haven't been given work to do. So he hires them. And then when the day is over, the owner pays all the workers the same amount. And the ones who've worked longer don't understand and are upset that they're not paid more. It's plainly unfair. This seems like an understandable, reasonable reaction, yes? Except that this is a parable about how God does things, how God relates to each one of us. And here again, in this reaction, the laborers, and we, are we any different? We join with them. We are all insisting that the gift of God conform to our own understanding, our own standards of worth, our own sense of deserving. We don't have the humility to see the gift for what it is. We don't even try. Just like the Israelites in the wilderness, we're just standing there looking at something that we've never seen before and saying, "What is it?" There's a part of this story that I would suggest helps us to see what it is. At the end of the day, the landowner tells his manager to pay the laborers in an order that is the reverse of what we would expect. The ones who started work last are paid first, then the ones who started just before them, and so on back through the day. So all those who worked the longest see plainly, it's right in front of them, that those who work the least are paid the same as they are. So the landowner intends this as a teaching moment. He arranges things this way. When the workers complain to him, those first workers complain to him about what they see as rank injustice, the landowner speaks not to the group, but to one of them, and addresses him as friend. These are both important details. God relates to each one of us, one-on-one, and God is on our side, even though it sometimes doesn't look that way. The landowner says, "What I've given you, I've given you. And what I've given them, I've given them." And ends his words with a question. "Are you envious because I am generous?" The problem is not with the landowner's generosity, but with how we laborers see it and fail to recognize it, fail to embrace it for what it is. God has kept God's promises to each of his laborers. The gift of God here to all of them, the what is it, is that God is generous, irrationally, incomprehensibly generous. Sometimes the clearest way to see the gifts of God is by seeing when God gives to others. And to do that is not only to see, but to receive. That's a gift of God. As parents, I'm sure you all feel the same way I do. It's a lot more fun on Christmas morning to watch our kids opening their presents than it is to open our own. And when we talk about the gifts of God, we are in the end always talking about one gift, the gift of God's love. It is a gift which God gives in an infinite variety of ways all around us all the time, whether it's fine flaky stuff on the ground to sustain us or outrageous wages freely given to someone else to open our minds and hearts to God's outrageous generosity. The readiness to be thankful is the open door through which we receive that gift, through which we recognize it in any of its infinite number of forms, and through which we pass it on to others. Let us not just stand there and ask, what is it? Let us live in thankfulness. It's a habit that's joyful and easy to cultivate. Let us make a point of it every day and thereby truly live in the Spirit of God. Thanks be to God. Amen.